Gretchen Harrington was born on June 13, 1967, in Pennsylvania. She was the youngest of 3 daughters in her family. Shortly after her birth, the family moved to the cozy town of Brummel, where her father, a pastor, found a job at the local church. Gretchen immediately fell in love with the town, spending a lot of time outdoors with her sisters and new friends. Brummel was a safe place for children, so her parents didn't worry when the kids played outside until late in the evening. The tight-knit community and picturesque nature made it feel like a paradise for children. Growing up in a religious family, Gretchen spent a lot of time at her father's church and excelled in Sunday school, consistently earning top marks. On August 15, 1975, when Gretchen turned 8 years old, her family eagerly awaited the return of her mother and newborn sister from the hospital. Gretchen wanted to greet them, but her father urged her not to miss her Sunday school lessons to maintain her excellent grades. Reluctantly agreeing, she took her Bible and set off for church. She usually walked there with her sisters, but on that joyful morning, they stayed home. Gretchen wasn't afraid to go alone since the church was less than a mile away, just an 8-minute walk from her home. Sunday school lessons consisted of 2 parts. First, the children gathered at Trinity Church, and after about an hour and a half, part of them transitioned to the church where her father served. However, at 11:30, when the children arrived at the second church, Gretchen's father noticed that his daughter was not among them. This struck him as odd, as the children had been transported as a group. He decided to call the first church, hoping that Gretchen had remained there. The call was answered by the wife of Pastor David, who led the Sunday school lessons. She informed him that Gretchen was not with them and relayed the information to her husband. He was surprised as Gretchen hadn't even attended his class that joyful morning. Her father began to feel increasingly anxious. He asked David to call the police and set off to search for his daughter. Driving the route between the churches, he checked neighboring streets, but there was no sign of Gretchen. He also contacted the parents of her friends, hoping she might be spending time with one of them, but they were either at church or home. Gretchen's best friend, the daughter of Pastor David, also hadn't seen her all day. The police immediately began their search. As news of Gretchen's disappearance spread throughout the town, hundreds of volunteers quickly joined the search. Virtually everyone in the community knew Gretchen's father, as they regularly attended his church, so everyone was eager to help. Together with the volunteers, the police searched the town and then began checking numerous wooded areas and riverbanks. A police helicopter also joined the search, surveying the area from the air. However, the search continued into the night without any results. The following day, even more volunteers joined the search efforts. The police made flyers with Gretchen's picture and information about her disappearance, which they posted along the roads and distributed to passing drivers. Despite all the efforts, the police not only failed to find Gretchen, but also did not uncover any clues as to what might have happened to her. After several days of searching, no substantial evidence was found, and Gretchen's fate remained unknown. Her disappearance was a devastating blow to the local community. People were used to allowing their children to roam the streets freely from an early age, and nothing like this had ever happened before. Kids could wander the woods for hours and swim in the river unsupervised, and their parents never worried. But now, all of that was a thing of the past. The fact that no one knew what had happened to Gretchen only intensified the fear. People discussed various theories. Some believed she might have run away from home, while others thought she went swimming in the river and drowned. However, the most terrifying theory was about a possible abduction. Parents stopped allowing their children to play outside unsupervised. However, after a few days, intriguing testimonies emerged. One witness claimed to have seen a girl resembling Gretchen near the church on that joyful morning when a green station wagon pulled up to her. But the witness did not see what happened next. Another person told a similar story, but insisted that a white Cadillac had approached the girl. The police continued to investigate these testimonies, checking on all car owners fitting those descriptions in the area, but they could not establish any connections. For days after Gretchen's disappearance, detectives received new information. In Westchester, a small town located about 30 minutes drive from Brummel, a call came into the police. One of the locals reported finding a pair of children's shorts that could belong to Gretchen. Investigators urgently showed them to her mother, but she assured them that they were not her daughter's clothes. Since then, the investigation had made no progress for several weeks. The police decided to stop the active search and focus on gathering evidence. The investigators continued interviewing witnesses and checking all available information. But with each passing day, their hopes of finding Gretchen alive diminished. This situation lasted for 2 months until, on October 14th, the police received a horrifying call. A man, out for a run in a national park located 20 minutes from Brummel, noticed something suspicious in the bushes. At first, he didn't understand what it was, but as he got closer, he realized he had discovered a human body. He urgently ran to the park rangers to inform them of his find, and they called the police. Law enforcement quickly determined that the remains belonged to a child, but due to the advanced state of decomposition, identification proved extremely difficult. Investigators decided that it could be Gretchen and showed her parents a photo of clothing that had been neatly folded next to the remains. Gretchen's mother recognized it, as she had sewn those items herself. Soon, forensic experts confirmed that it was indeed Gretchen by matching the remains with her dental records. They also established that the cause of death was multiple blunt force traumas to the head, resulting in the case being reclassified as a homicide. Due to the stage of decomposition, other details could not be determined, including whether the victim had been sexually assaulted. Moreover, in 1975, DNA analysis technology did not exist yet, so investigators were once again left without crucial clues. News of the murder once again captured the local community's attention, and the police began receiving even more testimonies. People realized that a dangerous criminal might still be among them, so everyone was eager for the perpetrator to be found as soon as possible. Investigators received dozens of reports about suspicious men spotted in the park where Gretchen's body was found, but all these leads yielded no results. They also checked everyone living within a few miles of the park who had a history of violent crimes, but to no avail. After several months had passed since the discovery of the body, the investigation stalled again, and there was no news. In the following years, the case was reopened sporadically. Detectives reviewed all available evidence and testimonies, but each time it led to inconclusive results. The main issue remained the lack of evidence. Even when the police began using DNA analysis, it yielded no results in this particular case, as no foreign samples were found on Gretchen's remains or her clothing. Thus, the case remained unsolved for many decades. Over time, it was mentioned in newspapers and on television, but only in recent years did the murder of Gretchen regain widespread attention. 2 journalists, Joanna and Mike, decided to write a book about the crime. They spent several years gathering all available information and attempting to uncover new facts. Both journalists grew up in Brummel and were approximately the same age as Gretchen at the time of her murder. Joanna, who was only 9 at the time, clearly remembered the event as it affected not only her life, but the entire town. After Gretchen's disappearance, children could no longer roam the streets carefree or leave their homes unsupervised. The fear of a repeat crime engulfed the community, and this feeling haunted them for many years. Even the youngest children felt how drastically their lives had changed, so each of them remembered the tragedy associated with Gretchen for a long time. To create the book, Joanna and Mike gained access to the case documents and conducted interviews with many people involved in the situation. They meticulously reconstructed the events of those days, detailing the entire story. The book, published in 2022, quickly drew significant attention to the case. However, its most considerable impact came a few months later when a woman approached the police wishing to discuss Gretchen's case. She met with the lead detective to share her story. The woman recounted that she was 10 years old when the murder occurred, and she lived in Havertone, very close to Gretchen's home. She was familiar with Gretchen and her older sisters, as well as many other children in the neighborhood. She often spent the night at her friends' houses. One time, while staying at the home of the 2 sisters, a horrifying incident occurred. In the middle of the night, the girl woke up from a touch on her body. Opening her eyes, she saw her friend's father quickly exiting the room. She was afraid to tell anyone about it and stayed there for another night. However, the situation repeated itself. The father of her friends came into the bedroom again and began touching her. The next morning, she mustered the courage to share this with one of the sisters. And to her surprise, the sister responded that similar incidents happened quite often. The girl also recalled that her father sometimes entered her sister's room at night. Upon returning home, she told her parents about the events, but instead of going to the police, they simply forbade her from visiting her friend's house anymore. This incident happened just a week before Gretchen's disappearance. After the woman recounted her story, she finally named the man David Zanstra, the pastor who ran the Sunday school. But that wasn't all. She also revealed that a month after Gretchen's disappearance, one of her friends had encountered a man who attempted to abduct her twice. The girl refused to get into his car and later told her friend that it was Zanstra who had tried to lure her in. To corroborate her story, the woman showed the detectives her personal diary, in which on September 15, 1975, she recorded her friend's request to keep it a secret as she feared that David Zanstra could harm her. Upon receiving this information, the police urgently reopened the investigation. Reviewing the case materials, detectives discovered several suspicious facts that indirectly pointed to David. It is known that he was the one who reported Gretchen's disappearance to the police. The pastor provided investigators with a detailed description of the girl's clothing: dark blue zipper shorts with front snaps and pockets without locks or buttons. He also noted that she was wearing a white blouse and that her hair was braided. He had ample time to abduct Gretchen, kill her, dispose of her body in the park, and return to the church to begin the lessons. According to David's statements, which he provided immediately after Gretchen's disappearance, he drove several children in his van to Gretchen's father's church after Sunday school. He claimed he did not see the girl that morning and only noticed her absence when her father brought it to his attention. Another interesting fact was that David, along with his wife and 3 children, moved to another state just a few months after the disappearance. He also owned several vehicles, including a green station wagon. As we remember, a witness told the police that they saw a similar car approaching the girl near the church on the day of her disappearance. Gathering all this information, detectives decided to speak with the man. At that time, he was 83 years old and lived in Georgia, so the team set off there. On July 17, 2023, detectives met with David Zanstra at the police station for questioning. When he realized that the detectives suspected him of murder, his first reaction was to deny it. He began asking what specific evidence there was against him. In response, the investigators informed him that they had a witness who claimed he had approached her during her sleepover at his home, as well as mentioning suspicions about his behavior toward his daughters. Hearing this, David was stunned, and his demeanor changed completely. Realizing that his secrets had come to light, he stopped denying everything and, 48 years after the murder, began to tell the truth. According to him, that morning he drove to Gretchen's father's church in his green American Motor station wagon and noticed the girl leaving her house. Waiting for a moment when there were no witnesses, he approached her and offered to give her a ride. Gretchen, knowing David from childhood, got into his car without hesitation, as their families were friends and she regularly attended his Sunday school. However, instead of taking her to church, he turned into an isolated park area, stopped the vehicle, and ordered her to undress. When the girl refused and said she wanted to go home, Zanstra struck her on the head several times, causing her to lose consciousness. After that, he removed her clothing, satisfied his urges, and then took her to another park. Finding no pulse, he moved her body into the bushes and covered it with branches. Returning to the church, he began his lessons. Upon learning of his confession, the police arrested Zanstra for Gretchen's murder and extradited him to Pennsylvania. He was placed in jail awaiting trial, but for law enforcement, this was just the beginning of a more in-depth investigation. Since Zanstra had made advances towards at least a few girls, detectives suspected there might be other victims. The situation was complicated by the fact that he had worked as a pastor in various towns and states for decades, which could have provided him with the opportunity to commit numerous other crimes. Most of the time, he worked with children and was held in high regard in the community, which likely allowed him to avoid suspicion. But now that the truth had surfaced, detectives took a DNA sample from him and began looking for possible matches in other unsolved cases. They also investigated the disappearances of girls in the towns where David had worked. Fortunately, it didn't take long to find the first possible match. Investigators came across the case of 4-year-old Amanda Campbell, who disappeared in California in 1991. Like Gretchen, she vanished without a trace after leaving her home in a quiet neighborhood. At that time, David Zanstra was also working as a pastor in that area. Although there is currently no evidence against him, police noted that this case bears striking similarities to Gretchen's abduction, and the pastor may be involved in both crimes. Law enforcement continues to investigate his possible connection to other cases. As these events unfold before our eyes, we may learn much more in the coming months. As for the trial in Gretchen's case, it has not yet begun. There is a possibility that David's lawyers may try to prolong the process and advise him to retract his confession. If that happens, the trial could last for years, and no one can guarantee that the man will live to see the final verdict. This story about Gretchen's disappearance and the subsequent investigation is striking in its horrific reality and the seriousness of the circumstances that led to it. It serves not only as a reminder of the brutality that can hide behind a kind face, but also underscores the importance of listening to victims' testimonies and not ignoring their words. Zanstra appeared to be a respected individual, yet his secrets caused immense suffering. This also indicates that the truth should always be sought, even when it lies buried beneath layers of time. The criminal's confession after decades of silence demonstrates that we should never lose hope for justice. I urge you to subscribe to my channel. We will find more captivating detective stories uncovered by me. I would also like to hear your thoughts on this story. Please share your impressions in the comments, as your opinion is very important to me.